Thank you very much for being with us today. Could I ask you to please just introduce yourself to us so that everyone knows who you are?
Certainly, Father. My name is Jacqueline Tart, but I'm known as Jackie.
All right. And where are you from originally? Where did you grow up?
I was born in Baltimore, Maryland. I went to parochial school at St. Michael's in Baltimore. But we were in the military, so we traveled around a lot. Don't really have any place that I call home except for Charlottesville and Powhatan now.
Excellent, excellent. And Randy, where were you born and raised?
I was born in Dunn, North Carolina, and raised in a farming community just outside Benson, North Carolina, both very small tobacco-growing farm communities. My dad was a farmer. My mom, for part of my life, was a housewife, a farmer's wife, and then she took a job and she worked in a restaurant.
Excellent.
And I was raised as a Protestant.
Good, good. Well, Jackie, you mentioned that you went to parochial schools there in Baltimore. What was that like when you were growing up? What role did church play in your family's life when you were growing up?
Well, I've always been Catholic. Wouldn't want to be anything different besides Catholic. Although I did get away from the church for quite a long time. But we went to school every day. We wore uniforms, wore a little beanie. Then after school, before school, we would go to church every day. But I am embarrassed to say that the church didn't play a big role in my life. I mean, my mother required that we go to church, but we never talked about it at home. We never read the Bible together. So frankly, the church was not a big influence on me when I was a kid.
All right.
And I regret that.
Okay, all right. Now, Randy, you said that you grew up in a Protestant church. Can you tell us a little bit about that, what that was like?
Well, I thought then, and I think now, that my growing up in that particular church, it was a small country church. In fact, it was founded in 1923 by a first cousin of my grandfather. Ira Tart was his name. And the people that attend the church, attended it then and attend it now, are just salt of the earth people. They're great people. The version of Christianity that was taught there was I think it was the one that I remember was a more traditional, strong, hellfire and brimstone sort of Christianity. Didn't turn me off. I loved the church then. I love it now. I particularly love the people that I went to church with. They're still there. The kids that I grew up with are running the church now. And it's where my mom and dad are buried. And when I go home and I go there, I feel that I'm at home. So I have a real love affair for that church. It's different than St. Mary's, but I know this could very well wind up on the net, and so I wouldn't want them to ever hear me say anything bad about the church, but I think in some ways I am more attuned to some of the teachings that go on here at St. Mary's than the church that I was raised in.
All right, thank you. Now, Jackie, you said that you come from a military family, right? Yes. What branch of the military was your family connected with? Army. And could you tell me where, you moved a lot, right, when you were growing up? So what were some of the places that you lived?
Well, as a child, my father was stationed overseas, so we lived in France and Germany. We loved Germany. France, not as much, but the French didn't like Americans back then. The Germans loved Americans, so you could tell the difference when you were out with the local gentry that the Germans really did appreciate Americans. The French did not so much. Well, we lived all over the country, all over America, Tennessee, I mean, you name it, North Carolina. We were stationed in a lot of different places. My father was a sergeant major. I'm very proud of that. He often told me before he died that I would have made a good drill sergeant. And I always took that as a real compliment. But we were a family of 5 kids, so there wasn't a lot of money. He was an enlisted man, an NCO, so there wasn't a lot of money. He was not Catholic, and he didn't go to church with us. But we went to a little church when I was in high school called St. Joseph's in Columbia, Virginia. It was one of the few integrated churches around there at the time, but I enjoyed going. But again, as I mentioned earlier, The church was not a big part of our lives, and I wish it had been more. But having said that, that's not the case now.
Right. Okay.
Thank goodness.
Thank goodness. Many people who have lived in military families tell me that that experience of living all over the world from a very young age and dealing with all kinds of cultures gives them a unique perspective on life. What would you say you learned? What life lessons did you learn growing up in a military family?
Well, I think one of the things that I learned for certain was to accept people for what they are. We were raised in a family that was not prejudiced, and that was back in a time when there was a lot of prejudice going on in the world. I mean, there were signs on restrooms that said colored only or white only, things like that. And it was a very terrible time. But being in the military, we weren't raised that way. We were raised that, it doesn't matter about the color of your skin. So having lived in a lot of different places, I think we were probably some of the children that got along with just about everybody.
Wonderful.
And I will say this about the Catholic schooling system. It was so tough compared to the civilian schools that we went to. But when we went to a different school, we were way ahead of everybody else because of the schooling that the Catholic faith gave us. They were tough, but they were fair, and it was a great lesson to be learned, to travel all over and go to different Catholic schools.
Wonderful, thank you. Now, Randy, you mentioned earlier that you entered the military at a fairly young age. Could you talk a little bit about how that happened and what led you into the military and then on to that career?
Well, it didn't start out as a career. It started out as a 2-year hitch. I didn't want the Army as a career. I wanted to serve my country. It was during the Vietnam War. When I turned 19 on November 4th, 1968, the Vietnam War was hot. And I went to the draft board and signed up, volunteered for the draft. I was raised to be patriotic, and I love my country. And there was a lot of demonstration going on against the Vietnam War in those days. Young kids my age and a little older were out in the streets marching, and I didn't like it. I wasn't raised to think that was right. And so I took exception to it, and so I wanted to do my patriotic duty, and I stepped up and did it. And I also wanted to kind of thumb my nose at those people that were demonstrating against, not the war in my mind, but against my country. I didn't like that. But I didn't want any more than 2 years. I didn't want to sign up for 3. And so I just said, I'm going to volunteer for the draft. I'll take my chances with the war in Vietnam. If you got drafted in those days and you were healthy, you were going to Vietnam. So I just decided I'll take 2 years and not 3 or more. And I didn't like the Army when I first went. I had a lot of conversations with myself laying in bed in the wee hours of the morning about the decision that I made and was it a good or a bad decision. I wound up, I tried my best, even though I was homesick and crazy over that, but I tried my best every day. And consequently, I guess I did okay in basic training, and I was offered the opportunity to attend the preparatory school for West Point, and I signed up for that, and I got selected, and then so I wound up going to West Point. So I kind of backed into a career. It just didn't start out as a career. It started out as a patriotic step to support my nation. If I didn't get killed, I figured I'd use the GI Bill and go to the University of North Carolina, and I'd be a happy Tar Heel forever. None of the latter part worked out, but it worked out better than that, really.
All right. So you attended the preparatory school at West Point. What happened next?
Well, we had to compete for an appointment to West Point, and I competed well enough that I got selected to go to West Point. And so I entered in 1971 and graduated in the class of 74, the awesome class of 1974. And having taken that course changed everything about my life. And one of the things that Jackie told you about a story, the stories I'm writing. One of the stories, and it'll take just a second, and you probably will want to edit this out, but when I was in basic training, that homesickness overwhelmed me. I was just a little boy in a uniform. I wasn't a soldier, and I didn't want to be there. And I cried myself to sleep at night. And I let that overwhelm me to some extent. And they marched us one day into this big old World War II building. The paint was holding the building together, dozens of coats of paint. But he marched us in to give us an aptitude test, a battery of tests, several of them. Well, on the first one, I sat there just like they told us to, and I started taking the test, but I had my feel. I didn't want to be there. So I literally took my number 2 pencil and I laid it down and I just stretched back and I said, I'm not taking this test. And I started getting my story together to explain to the drill sergeant, because I'm about to get my lunch eaten here when he sees me not taking the test. What are you doing, Tart? And I was going to explain to him, drill sergeant, I don't have a bad attitude here. I volunteered for the draft. I love the Army, or no, I don't hate the Army. I love my country. And I know I knew when I signed up for the draft, I'd probably be going to Vietnam. So where I am right now is I think I'm wasting my time here in basic training. I just want to move on. So let's stop the silliness. Just help me get to Vietnam now. I'm ready to go right now. I want to get that year behind me. Help me. And I was sitting there for probably 8 or 10 minutes refining that story in my mind, because I knew I had to have a good story here. Those drill sergeants weren't going to take kindly to this. And as I was sitting there, a huge light bulb, Edison light bulb, popped right in front of my face. At that time, there was a Ford Motor Company commercial with that light bulb, and you would hear click, click, and that light bulb would come on. And in the background, a voice would say, Ford has a better idea. Well, that light bulb popped in front of my face, and I'm sitting there looking at that light bulb, and I'm with my hands behind my head, and I'm going, what is that? And suddenly, from out of nowhere, that bulb appeared, and then I heard the click, click, and it came on, and I'm going, what's this? And then I didn't hear Ford has a better idea. In my own voice, I heard, you're being stupid here. You can do better than this. You need to be doing better than this. You're not the dumbest guy in this room, but you're acting like it. And poof, the light went away just as quick as it showed up. And I grabbed my pencil and I started taking that test. I was about 10 minutes behind everybody else. And I started taking the test as hard as I could. And I caught up and finished it. The answers almost exploded off the page for me. And then I completed the rest of the test. And based upon that, the scores I made, I was offered the opportunity to go to the prep school. I believe that light bulb was divinely inspired. I think that's the only thing I can make out of it. I didn't do that light bulb. It was done for me, and I just responded to it. The doors started opening, and I just walked through them. And so I walked to here, and we've been happily ever after.
Excellent. So, which brings me to my next question. How did the two of you meet?
Okay. I was living in Indianapolis, Indiana, working at Fort Benjamin Harrison. I was the secretary to the chief of staff. Randy had just come back into the military after having been out working for Procter & Gamble. And he had been invited by the military to come back into the Army, which he did. So he came into my office, and he had an office call with was it my boss or the general? I can't remember. Both of them. He had an office call. He was the commander of the Criminal Investigation Division at Fort Harrison. He was a captain at the time. So he came in, and to be honest with you, my first impression was, where is this guy from? You could cut that accent with a knife. His accent was so thick.
Kills them every time.
I mean, I was Southern, but I wasn't that Southern. I was a little bit Southern. But anyway, but when I first met him, I didn't think anything special. So he had his office call, Well, long story short, I was a single mom at the time, and I was kind of the leader. I was the social leader for my group of friends, some married, some unmarried. And because he was a bachelor, I invited him to join our little social group. We went to the Officers Club for brunch every Sunday, and some Fridays we would go to the Officers Club for the evening. And there were about probably 15 of us or something like that. And every Sunday at brunch, he would sit there. He was very quiet, very reserved, and I could tell he was very smart, had a great sense of humor. But every Sunday, while we were all talking and having our mimosas, he would be sitting there reading the paper from front to back every Sunday. I mean, he would just kind of zone out.
I don't remember that part.
He would kind of zone out. But that's how we met. And we developed a relationship, and we got married a year later.
And she's been carrying me ever since.
So what year did you get married? What year would that be?
34, what year is that?
1982.
1982.
Mm-hmm. And Randy, you continued in the military, so did life take you all over, as it often does?
Yes, from our marriage at Fort Benjamin Harrison, we left and went to West Point, back to my alma mater, and I was the military police company commander and operations officer. And then we left there, and the Army sent us to the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California. And I got a master's in information technology. And then I left there and went to, and we came to Virginia, to Fort Lee. And pretty much since then, the Army's been very good to us. And
Very good.
Jackie pretty much stayed in this area, the Fort Lee area, and I went off to a tour in Korea. My mom had a stroke, and she wound up in a nursing home for 6.5 years in North Carolina, so that's how we chose Fort Lee to begin with. And it was very important to me to stay close to her, to help my youngest brother and sister who lived nearby her take care of her. And so we were able to work with the Army and stay in the Fort Lee area because that's the closest fort that would enable me to stay close to my mom. So we stayed there for a while, essentially until I retired, but I had to go to Korea by myself for a year and went to the Army War College by myself, and then I took a little tour to Alexandria, Virginia by myself. But Jackie and I are very good. We have a sound marriage, and we made it all work.
One of the things I hear from couples who are living a military life is that separation can be hard, and one spouse is staying home and raising the family and keeping all of that going, and the other is deployed in many different places and circumstances. How did you deal with those challenges?
It wasn't very difficult. I mean, I was keeping the house. We had built a house, and so I was keeping the house and working at Fort Lee. And then if I had gone with him to Korea, it would have been a 2-year assignment instead of 1. So we just decided that we would keep the house, pay on the house. I would keep my job. And I have never been afraid to be alone. I'm not crazy about it, but I'm not afraid to be alone. And Randy was so good about writing a lot, and we talked on the phone a lot. So it really has never been a problem. I mean, you get lonely, but I thought it was the best thing for his career. I do want to say something that he didn't mention that I think is very germane here. The reason that he stayed at Fort Lee was his mother. They call it, in the military, they call it homesteading, when you're not willing to take another duty assignment for personal reasons. But his mentor, who was a general officer, got very angry with Randy for doing that. He wanted to get him promoted to general officer. But let me tell you what, in my opinion, Randy made the best decision that he could have ever made to stay near his mother. He doesn't have any guilt feelings about it now. He knows he did the right thing. It helped her tremendously. It helped the family tremendously. I am so glad that he made that very difficult decision, because that was a difficult decision. Because, what was his name, General?
Barry.
Barry wanted to get him promoted. But that wasn't important to Randy, and it wasn't important to me. I wanted him to do the best thing for his family, especially Miss Mabel, and he did. And I'm so glad that he did.
I would add on top of what she said about making our marriage work, we weren't kids when we got married.
No.
I was 32 and Jackie had previously been married. And one of the things about her that attracted me to her was the maturity involved here. And she didn't say it. I know she's all about my draw, and she was crazy about that and everything, but my maturity, I'm sure, attracted her too.
That's true.
We had a very solid marriage that was super well grounded from day one.
Correct.
And so if I had to go to Korea by myself for a year, there was never any concern on my part or on hers about the fact that our marriage was solid, and that was number one, and there would be no issues in our marriage, and there never was.
And another thing, I totally trusted him, and he totally trusted me, which is a big deal.
Yeah.
Because you don't always have that when you have, military couples split up like that. But we never had that issue at all, not one time.
Thank you. Now, Randy, you grew up in that strong faith that you learned in that little church in your hometown. In your military career, was there ever a moment where you really needed to rely on that faith to get you through either a difficult or dangerous situation?
Well, I wouldn't say get me through a dangerous situation. I don't think that faith played a part in any of that. But I believe. Well, I told you about the article that I wrote and that got published in my hometown paper about my church. And I put there in that article that the things I learned in that church were foundational to whom I am, to whom I became. So every single day, I took part of that church with me to work. And it played a role in everything I did, the decisions I made and all. It was based upon the learnings, the teachings, and the friendships and the thought trains that we shared and all in that church as I was a kid growing up. I took all that with me to West Point, and then from West Point into the Army.
And you will never meet anybody with a stronger moral compass than my husband. Ever. In my opinion.
I gave her $20 before we came in.
Well, you know I'm your biggest fan. You know that. I plead guilty.
Wonderful. Well, can we talk a little bit about how you, coming from all kinds of different places in your military careers, how did you end up as members of St. Mary's Parish here in the West End? Can we talk a little bit about what drew you to this community?
I would like to address that, Father.
Sure, please.
Well, it started out, I've been away from the church for 50
I'm supposed to be the talker in the family.
She's doing a great job. So.
Listen.
Okay, so go ahead.
Mine won't be as long as yours, honey.
Go ahead.
I can't hold a candle to your story. But this is what happened. I had a choking incident at home where I literally almost choked to death. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. I panicked. I didn't think about using the chair as a Heimlich maneuver instrument. But Randy was in his study, and he heard me floundering, I guess. I'm not even sure how he heard me because I didn't make a sound. And he ran to the kitchen, and he had never given the Heimlich, but he gave it to me that day, and he literally saved my life that day. If he had not been at home, I'm not sure I would be sitting here talking to you right now. He called my doctor, and the doctor said to take her into the emergency room immediately. I was there for 3 days. This was what, honey? How long
It
ago?
was in
A year?
April of 2015.
Okay. So they kept me there for 3 days. During that 3-day period, the first night I was there, a deacon came to visit me. It was, St. Francis, Bon Secours. A deacon came to visit me, and he asked me, Mrs. Tart, would you like me to say the Lord's Prayer with you? And I said, I would love if you would do that. The next night, a nun came to see me, and she said the same thing. And I said the same thing to her. The third night, a priest came to see me, and I apologize, I don't remember their names. And he said the same thing as well. And so we said the Lord's Prayer that night as well. The next morning, when Randy came to get me from the stay there, I told him, I said, Randy, there is something missing in my life, and I just realized it last night. I want to join a Catholic church. I want to get back to the church after my 50-year absence. I'm embarrassed to even say that out loud, frankly. So he said, okay. And so we went to one church, and I wasn't really impressed initially. I wasn't really sure why not, but I wasn't. And then a mutual friend of ours told me that you were at St. Mary's. And I loved it from day one. The friendliness of all the people that were in that church was absolutely amazing, how welcome they made us feel and how loved they made us feel from the very first day. It's the highlight of my week. Every week going to St. Mary's is the highlight of my week. When I leave your church, Father, I just feel so uplifted, and you always give us something to think about. We are very happy in that church. We love the people that go there.
They're so concerned about our welfare and show so much love for us that if I think Jackie has missed 3 Sundays in the last about little less than a year and a half. If she doesn't feel like coming in, I can't let them down. I have to come in and let them know what's going on because they're going to be worried.
It's a requirement.
That's the kind of love that they show us.
And not just them, people that don't even know us go out of their way to say hello to us and be friendly. I mean, I just think that's amazing.
Yeah.
I really do. They don't even know us, and they're so kind.
Yep.
You mentioned your journey with cancer. When did that begin?
Well, about 10 years ago, I had my first bout with cancer. It was stage 3. Came through that fine. I continued to work during that. That was a piece of cake, and I had radiation and surgery, but that was a piece of cake, really. Mostly just an inconvenience. But this is different. This is stage 4, terminal. I was in hospice for 3 weeks. My oncologist said that there was nothing more he could do for me. I was too weak to have any more chemo. And so they sent me to, what was that doctor? The doctor across the hall? Palliative care. Palliative care. And I was put in hospice for 3 weeks.
And given weeks, not months to live.
Right. And so I was just kind of resigned to that. Not much I could do. I didn't say, woe is me. There was no point in that. It was just what it is. But anyway, my oncologist took me off the chemo and all the meds and everything. And I was in hospice. And then he took me off one of the chemo treatment that I was on. And lo and behold, thanks to God, my liver numbers totally reversed. Totally. And one day, Randy called him and said, Dr. Irvin, you need to see Jackie. She's a changed woman since you took her off that chemo. And he said, because we had just stopped even going to him. I mean, we no longer were using
Yeah, once you go onto the hospice program, you're off all medicines from that point on.
He no longer really is your doctor.
No.
So he said, and bless his heart, I'll never forget that. He said, well, I don't care about all that stuff. Bring her in and let me see her, which we did. And when he saw me, he couldn't believe how differently I looked after having taken that chemo off. And he put me back on chemo, a different one, which I mean, I've been on a couple of different chemos in the last year and a half. But still, they've all been working sort of. But because chemo, is a crapshoot. You don't know what you're going to get, and the doctor can't tell you what you're going to get. I mean, he was honest with me the first day I met him. He told me it was terminal, and that it would kill me, and I love that about him, that he told me the truth. Of course, I didn't ask him, when am I going to die, because I didn't want to know, and I'm sure he wouldn't have had an answer for that. But that's where we are right now. We're still in chemo, and I think I'm doing great. I really think I'm doing really well.
So this time that you were in hospice, when was that?
That was, she went onto hospice onto the program on July 15th, 2015.
2015, and you were given weeks to live at that time.
Yes.
So, weeks, not months, he said.
So God is in my corner. There is no doubt in my mind that he is watching over me, along with many, many hundreds of prayers that I have every day from friends and family. And when I say hundreds, I mean hundreds. It's between the prayers and God. That's why I'm sitting here, Father. That's the only reason I'm sitting here. Randy counts each day since I got out of hospice as a bonus day. So today, I wrote it down, 453 bonus days as of today. 453 since hospice. When I came out of when I came out of hospice, Father, Dr. Irvin said, you are a walking miracle. And I said, Father, you don't have to tell me that. I know that. I know I'm a miracle. Not too many people leave hospice. Once you're there, you're there.
453 bonus days, and we count them every one. We also count them not just as bonus days, but as blessings. Every single one of these days is a blessing from God, and we recognize that, and we pray to God every day and thank Him for the blessing that day is, every day.
We pray when we first wake up to Him together, right? We pray at midday to Him, and so we don't forget. We get busy. We set time, and we say a prayer at night to Him every single day of our life, because we know He's the one that's responsible for this.
As a minimum, and those are the joint prayers we do.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
We pray a lot, don't we?
Prayer saved the day when she was on hospice.
It did.
There's no question in her mind
Absolutely.
or mine or the mind of any of our friends and family. She was given weeks, not months, to live. She was on hospice for 3 weeks. For 10 or 12 of those 3 weeks, she was looking bad. She was losing a pound to 2 pounds plus every single day. She wasn't eating anything, and she was getting no medicine at all. Now, one good thing about it was she was never in any pain and never sick. She just wanted to sleep 24/7 just about. And at one point there, I remember looking at her and I just said, I've got maybe another couple weeks with my baby, and that's it. And then we called all the family in. We were trying to get prepared. And one morning, we were ordering breakfast sandwiches for everybody, and we would get her up and take her downstairs from the bedroom to the sofa just so she could be part of the crowd. She was laying on the sofa, and we were getting our breakfast order in, and she hadn't eaten a handful of food in 10 days plus and losing weight like crazy. She heard us ordering those food. I thought she was asleep as usual, and suddenly I heard from the living room, "I'm hungry too, I want one." It's like, God answered the prayer in that way. And at lunch, she wanted she wanted lunch. And just like that, it all turned around, and she started regaining weight and regaining strength. And Dr. Irvin then said, "You don't need to be on hospice, you need to be on chemo." And she's been on it ever since.
Randy, you once told me that some of your family members or friends who knew that you were raised in a Protestant church have asked you what it's like as someone not raised Catholic and not officially Catholic. What's it like to come to a Catholic Mass? And I thought your answer was very interesting. Could you remind me of that?
Yes. It was my cousin and lifelong best friend, and he's very active in his church down in North Carolina, in my hometown. And he asked me that, how's it feel? And I said, how's it feel when the Catholic Church is doing all those traditional rites and things like that? And I just said, well, I don't understand a lot of them. They're different. I'm working on it, and I'm trying to get it down. I said, but the absolute truth is, it's the Church of Jesus Christ, just like the one you go to and like the one I was raised in. Jesus is a Jesus, and when we stand up and say the Lord's Prayer, it sounds pretty much like the Lord's Prayer that you say and that I say. And he said, yeah, I get that. I understand that. So that was pretty much where I was coming from then and am coming from now.
Jackie, you mentioned earlier that for a while you were not practicing the Catholic faith that you learned as a child, and now you're back, and you've got all your friends there in Section 4 and connections with people. What has it been like for you to be back practicing your faith?
It's been absolutely wonderful. It has changed my life. At the top of, I make to-do lists, Father, every day, or I don't remember things. But at the top of my list for weeks was go to confession. I mean, when one has been away from the church for 50 years and you haven't been to confession, it's pretty startling to think about going to confession because you're thinking, gosh, I'm going to be in there for several hours. But my friend found me a place to go. I didn't want to go to you. I was a little embarrassed to go to you. I will admit that. But my friend Alice found me a place, St. Benedict's, and she and Randy and I went there for the first time. It was a wonderful feeling to go to confession. I went in, and when I was a kid, we would go into what looked like a closet, and the priest would, open up the window, although you couldn't see one another, thank goodness. But I went downstairs to the little place to give confession, and there was a little bit, you couldn't see the priest, and he couldn't see you, but you could hear one another. And I said to the priest, I said, Father, bless me, Father, for I have sinned. It has been 50 years since my last confession. Well, I thought he would probably laugh or clear his throat or something, but he did not do anything. He just listened. And I gave my confession, which didn't take as long as I thought it would. And then afterwards, he gave me my penance. And the funny part about it was they had a kneeler, which our church doesn't have kneelers anymore. So I knelt down, and I'm thinking to myself, boy, I hope I can get up. I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to get up. I can get down, but I can't get up. But anyway, so after we were done, I tried to get up, and guess what? I couldn't get up. And I said, Father, I hate to bother you, but would you please help me up? And he came around. So I saw him for the first, his name was Father Tony. Father, he looked like he was 15 years old. I swear, I got the biggest kick out. He was so sweet and so kind and so non-judgmental. He was just perfect. So I went back upstairs, and I said to my friend Allison and Randy, I said, okay, did the thunder roll? Did the lightning go off? I said, I'm shocked if nothing happened. But that confession, that was the first time I really felt like I was back. And I love being back. I really do.
Wonderful. To conclude, what are you most grateful to God for today?
Gosh, that's hard to
You want me to take that? I can take that.
All right, go ahead and take it. I may amplify it, but you go ahead. Because I got a lot
She
I could
says
say.
to me every day, and she said it for years, but she says to me every day, "Hon, I love my life." And I say to her in response every time, "I love my life with my wife." That's just our little thing. And we do it every day without fail, and sometimes many times in a day. But we both believe that going all the way back to July 15th when she was placed on hospice last year, and then was taken off hospice on August 5th, 453 days ago. We believe that was all about God's intervention into our lives directly.
We did.
And that's what the church and the Christian faith we have, that's what it's all about for us. And that's what it's all about for me. And I can get it here under your tutelage and mentorship and all in St. Mary's, or from the Protestant church I was raised in. I can get it from either place, but it's Jesus Christ and God's teaching that I'm getting, and I appreciate that.
One thing I want to say, and I have to say this, and I promise it'll be very short. The very favorite thing that I do on a daily basis, and frankly, Father, I don't think about this cancer too much. I really don't. It is what it is, but I really don't dwell on it at all.
And we're shooting for 453 plus more.
But I dwell on my family and my friends and my relationship with God and Jesus. My favorite part of the day, without fail every day, is when I have a conversation with God, He and I, just He and I, alone, nobody else around. That's my favorite part of the day, because I know He's listening,
talk amongst yourselves.
I know He's on my side, and He's watching over me.
He is. And thank you very much for sharing this journey with us and for sharing your faith with us and for sharing this bonus day with us. Just as St. Mary's has been a blessing to you, you're a blessing to us. So we thank God for you too.
Thank you. Thank you for asking us. We were very honored to be asked.
Yes.
All right. Well, God bless you.
Well, thank you
bless
so
you.
much.
Amen.